Welcome to the General's Gentlemen.
Hello, and welcome back to the RTS podcast. We got about 5 minutes in, and then there was some technical issues, so we had to restart. But welcome to Wayward.
How's it
Welcome
going,
to
guys?
Topher. And welcome to Nakamura. Man, doing intros for the second time doesn't have the same vibe to it, does it?
Doesn't have the
It's
same
like, all right,
punch.
Let's get it over and done with, you know. But I think we started off on a pretty interesting trend. So let's go over that again quickly. I asked Balin about Halo Wars 2, whether the removal of like worker units, and I say removal, I guess I mean more from the traditional RTS design, because Halo Wars 1 certainly didn't have worker units either. But what was your summary about like whether or not Halo Wars 2 would have been better, or your thoughts on Halo Wars 2 not having worker units and that freeform base building?
You know what? I think I can do better actually than my previous
good.
reply. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. So basically, Halo Wars 1, I didn't work on it, but I know that it started as a prototype of Age of Mythology on the console. So Microsoft
That's
has
wild.
approached Ensemble about doing a console RTS, and they wanted to figure out the tech behind it and the controls and how it feels and what they got to do in terms of design, because basically it's not been done properly before. There was an Age of Empires 2 on PS4, but it was just it was not properly built for it. It was just bastardized, kind of. So what they realized is that the game is just far too difficult in terms of economic management of free resources, 3.5 really, in the case of AOM, and that they found base building way too hard. So that's why they did the whole radio system, where every selection results in basically a radial UI popping up where you can select stuff. And they decided to remove workers and to make slot buildings for each base. So that's where it all came from, and they even went so far as to slow down the combat, make units more automatically functional, and fire as they move and stuff, as well as stuff like only having the single resource with the slot buildings. So yeah, that's what CA had to start with when Halo Wars 2 began development, and basically just from looking at matches, I think the whole design team felt that it's just too simple. You know, you got your one base, you got your 5 supply pads, and there's really not much to do with it. So the direction they went in is adding another resource, energy, which basically went in a tech resource direction at first, very much akin to Vespene gas, and later took a turn and started behaving differently. But on the topic of base building, the major thing was the addition of mini bases, and basically an increased ability to expand, as well as the economic factor of the on-map nodes, which generate power as you capture them. So the removal of workers
was there
is
only
actually
the main base in Halo Wars 1? There was no mini bases at all?
No, you could you did have mini bases on one map, I believe, maybe 2.
Right.
But they were just slots. Okay, so they weren't a mini base that you could attach a building to, but they were just a building slot. So there wasn't a base structure that you could make the basic unit from. So there's a lot of expansion opportunities in Halo Wars 2 compared to Halo Wars 1. So it's definitely heavier on base building, but it's still very, very simple when you compare it to Starcraft or Age of Empires or all these macro RTSs, as I like to call them. And as for the removal of workers, or rather just not having workers, that was actually one of the topics I brought up in my own interview as a design discussion. As for why it's better, I argued that having workers makes the economy just much more, how to say this, it's a much more step-by-step system. You can grow your economy in small increments. You can damage the other guy's economy in small increments. Whereas in Halo Wars 1, you had this problem where commitment to kill a single supply pad would cost you a lot. Like, you commit your entire army to that one supply pad, and then if you don't kill it, nothing happens, right? It's just a damaged supply pad, it's fine. Whereas in a game like Age of Empires, it's very, very easy to kill a worker. In a game like Starcraft, it's very, very easy to kill a worker. And getting value out of a single unit can come at a cost of killing 2 workers or something like that. Absolutely not possible in Halo Wars. Later down the project, we had problems again with people expanding. And we basically made it so that the economy really rewards you for expanding, and you can make up to 15 or 16 pads. So that basically allowed people to start damaging those and actually harass the economy a bit. But it's still very much on a console RTS level, as that was the goal to begin with.
Yeah, that's a really good argument for both builder units and worker units. Another example that I can think of is Battle for Middle Earth, because you had farms and stuff, but there was no, like, the farms didn't have sheep and a shepherd that you could harass. It was like all or nothing. I don't remember how vulnerable the farms are, but yeah, I think any RTS game that doesn't have worker units, that's like cutting down trees or whatever, even if it's automated, like even if you don't actually have to build and micro the worker units, just having worker units that auto replenish and auto build makes the harassment less lethal, like less all or nothing, which I think makes it a lot more fun for both people involved. So I think
Grey Goo did that too.
Right.
With the auto reboot units.
Okay.
Yeah, and so did active aggression. I think you had to build the workers, but they were automatically controlled. At least in the initial launch. I think they changed that when they did their big reboot. But I don't think I ever really played it after they did their reboot. But yeah, that was kind of a thing for a while, where there was experimentation with kind of completely automating workers. But not to sound like a broken record, but I definitely agree with kind of the general sentiment here that a worker-based economy tends to be more interesting, and the more workers you have, the more opportunity there is for kind of incremental benefits and harassment. That was one of my complaints actually with Deserts of Karak, that there were workers, but your number of them was very constrained, and most of the maps still kind of had this logic of your side of the map, my side of the map. So there were instances where your worker line would be exposed, but it was more limited than I felt was it probably should have been. It's harassment's one of those things where a lot of players don't like it, but it's so core to what an RTS is that you really kind of need it. So we were though talking about base building was kind of the general topic we'd started off on, and I wanted to ask what you guys thought the kind of gold standard or the paragon of base building in the genre was. For me, it's hard to not say Supreme Commander. I think, Callum, you talked about this in the article that you wrote, where there's just so many little things that are going on where building building the power generators next to a barracks made it build faster.
Yeah, there was adjacency bonus with power plants that you would save like a little bit of power.
The metal storage too, I think, wasn't there?
Yeah, you would surround. So there was kind of two things where you would build storage around a generator, whether it's metal or power, because you get more resource efficiency. Or if you build power next to things that consume power, they consume less.
Right, like force fields and stuff.
Yeah, like a shield or a factory, or like even a radar. I think turrets would fire faster too if you did something. So there was a few little things. I mean, my criticism was that there wasn't any opportunity cost to weigh up. There wasn't like, should I build power for adjacency, or should I build a radar for extra range. There was only one type of benefit for each thing, so there wasn't like a decision. Whereas StarCraft, a very different way of thinking about it, but it is adjacency bonus with the reactor and the tech lab, and there is actually an opportunity cost. You have to think like, which one do I want? You can't have both.
Yeah, I mean the other advantage there too is you can swap them back and forth, so you can kind of trade off that advantage and disadvantage. I think that's really important in RTS too, where your decision doesn't remain static, where you can take a decision and tweak it a little later to get a different kind of advantage.
I think that's why Age of Empires works, is because it's all about villages, and you can transition villages between different
From
resource
thing
types.
to thing. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and their drop-off base building is just really beautiful. You have to keep making sure that your workers are close to it, and in case of forest, you want to make sure that there's some space between the forest and the workers so that they can make a nice concave and then drop off again. You rebuild as the distance increases. It's really nice, I think. And
Yeah.
you can force drop-off with the workers in Age of Empires and Mythology. Basically, they have a capacity. In some cases, it's too high for what you're currently doing, so you can just force the drop-off. Which is something that like StarCraft and Warcraft don't really care about. You just let your workers do their thing, and they drop off automatically, and that's fine for your economic progression. But in Age of Empires, you have to think about that.
Yeah, I wanted to go back and make one little concluding thought on like Halo Wars 2 workers before we go down the base building rabbit hole.
Sure.
The perspective that you said, Balent, was that was it Creative Assembly? Well, whoever was working on like the publishers, their design idea for what ended up being Halo Wars is they wanted to make Age of Wonders work on console, and they figured, nah, base building doesn't work with worker units. I think that's the reason why it didn't work, is because in those Age games, you have so many workers. You have like 20, 30, 50. And
In
managing
Age of Mythology, you have 80. That's the norm.
workers.
You go to the maximum. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
then there's the caravans.
So managing that on a controller would be nuts. But the Command and Conquer Generals style of dozers, where you only like have 2 or 3 dozers, I think that base building would work fine on a controller. So I think it was sort of like they didn't really give it a proper go. They're just like, no, can't do worker units on controller. Let's get rid of workers. You're like, well, we'll just make them like make workers a lot like there's less of them, but they're more impactful. I think that would have been a better approach.
I completely agree with you. The Command and Conquer way of doing workers would have been fine for Halo Wars, absolutely. But for Halo Wars 2, you know, even though I've made this very argument the first opportunity I had, that it should have workers, in hindsight, I can totally see why the decision makers went against something like that. It just wouldn't feel like Halo Wars, right? Like Halo Wars created a legacy, and 2 should feel like the predecessor, but better.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good goal to have when you make a sequel.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case for breaking with your predecessor. I think the example of that probably is Warcraft 3, but there are so many examples that go the other way, where a company has made a choice to divorce themselves from what came before, and it hasn't gone well. You know, we made that whole joke about Dawn of War 3 the first time when we had to stop the recording, but let's just look at Dawn of War to Dawn of War 2. Now, my favorite Dawn of War probably is 2, but I'm in the vast minority there. Most players who've played any of them like the first one. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to look at there about how and potentially even why they made those changes. But the fact is, you know, we're looking at a franchise that made a big change, and it didn't go well. So at the very least, it's safer to kind of iterate and evolve on what you did. I think there's going to be a lot of really disappointed people if Relic takes the new Age of Empires game and makes it not feel like Age of Empires. I think they're going to probably have to play it safe and make Age 4 a lot like the classic ones.
You know what Age of Empires needs? Trading cards.
If they put it on Steam, it's gonna get trading cards.
Oh, that was a riff about Age of Empires 3.
I know, I'm kidding.
Jeez.
I do think on that topic, you have to also consider kind of a niche a game builds for itself. So, like Nakamura said about like sticking to a legacy, when a game is it's not entirely outside the norm, but it was the first big console RTS and had a very unique economic style. When designing 2, you can always ask yourself, so we can make this more traditional because it's going to be on PC, obviously, and so they were looking, we could add workers, and I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but you could say, are we leaving our niche and what people like to maybe make our economy slightly better? And you probably have to weigh that, and you also have to weigh, like, do we get rid of our static base positions, the predetermined? Do we have to revamp our entire economy, and is that worth it for maybe a marginal gain in an improvement in the quality of the game? And for me, I actually kind of would prefer sticking with what people like, who you are, and not having to retrofit your entire game to a different economic system purely because it might appeal to a slightly different crowd, versus staying true to who you are and improving, making your game better than it was before, without just building a whole new game from the ground up and calling it Halo Wars 2.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
I think with
this
Halo,
is a fair
though,
argument.
It's such a strong IP that they could have done whatever, and it's still a lot of people would have had their eyes on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with IPs, it gives you more flexibility to do that.
I agree. One thing I really enjoyed about any RTS really is something that makes it unique, whether the combat's unique or the graphic or the era is unique. And I really like the Halo universe, but one thing I really liked about Halo Wars was the unique economic system about predetermined base locations, and you really have to think about that when building maps and planning to play in a map. And so I'm not saying I would have enjoyed Halo Wars 2 less if it had a different economic system, but I would probably be a little more wary of it. Just like, oh, do I really want to play it if it's just the same as every other RTS? But that's like one person opinions. But I also love the story, so I would play it. I would buy that game at day one because I just want to find out what happens. But
yeah. Anyway, to clarify what the directive was at the time, it was to be Xbox focused.
Mm-hmm. And yeah,
so that was just a reinforcing point of the decision, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sorry, I didn't mean to make it say it's obviously not PC focused. They kept the radial menu and things like that when they were designing it, obviously. And so that was just something I did want to point out, that it was Xbox focused first, especially with the newer system. But at some point, at least for me personally, knowing it would come to PC did help my decision. So.
Yeah, I did like the cross-play that Microsoft does with some of those games. I actually have it installed right now, both on my PC and my Xbox. Yeah, it's a big game though. Jeez, it's a large install.
Yeah, 50-something gigs.
Yeah, although it's hard to complain because Heroes of the Storm is comparable. It's like 40.
Ooh.
I'm just showing my age here. All these installs that are more than like 20 gigs, and I'm like, what? Sorry.
Back in my day, we used to install games off of CD-ROMs.
Exactly.
I still have my 3 Warcraft 3 CDs.
Oh gosh, yeah, I remember the Lord of the Rings role-playing game was on like 12 floppy disks or something. 16. You have this big stack of floppies, and you swapping them out.
Oh my god!
Installing.
You know what you're doing for the next 6 hours?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love
Actually,
I love the CNC way of doing it. It's like, which campaign do I want to play? You have to think about that before you play the game, because you have to load the Soviet disc in or the Allied disc.
I gave my best friend the Allied CD, and that's how we played multiplayer, because he didn't buy it, so I bought it and I gave him one CD. I had the other one, and that's how we did multiplayer.
We only ever had the Soviet disc, so we played the Soviet campaign for 5 times, and we never played the Allied campaign. RIP. Yeah.
Soviets were better anyway.
So why do you think Supreme Commander's base building is so good? Because I find there isn't really a lot of complexity. Like when you're playing Subcom, you don't really have to think. I'm talking not about economy and production. I'm talking about like the specific base building. You don't really have to think about like where and what you place. You just kind of plonk it down wherever you have room.
So I guess for me, it's because it's one of the few games that takes adjacency, treats it mechanically. Like you talked about the one example with the Blizzard, the StarCraft 2 Terran production structures, where swapping them around to either have a lab or a reactor changes whether two of a low tech unit or one at a time of a higher tier unit. And I think that's valid. I think that's definitely a more interesting system with more interesting decisions. But Supreme Commander is it makes that sort of thing pervasive in the economy. And yeah, there's not as many choices to it, but there still are choices. Like the way I end up playing when I play Supreme Commander, and it's been a while. When you're playing quickly, you don't necessarily think about that all the time in the moment. So what ends up happening is in the beginning, you're laying everything out carefully and you're getting the bonuses, and then by the middle or the end of the game, when you're in the thick of things, that starts happening less and less, and you get these interesting kind of percentages of efficiency happening. These little pieces of efficiency and inefficiency that have an impact on aggregate. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about a large scale game is how all of the numbers kind of aggregate one way or another, just little by little, like grains of sand almost. So I think that's why when I think of base building, I tend to think of Supreme Commander as kind of the approach to beat, just because, while yes, it's not necessarily the decisions. Each decision isn't very interesting. You're making so many of them, and you have to make so many decisions that the ones you make end up making the interesting choices for you over time.
I think one thing that Subcom does is you have to build your base in a dense way because you want to minimize the amount of shields that you need, because each shield consumes a lot of power. So you have to think about like what are my important things that I stuff under the shields? What are my unimportant things that I leave exposed? Or do I want to invest the power in building the shields over my not important things? And eventually you will when you get more into the late game. What about you, Topher? What do you think is your holy grail of RTS base building?
That's such a hard thing because I think there are so many different ways to put it. Like, for me, the StarCraft formula is nearly perfect for a few reasons. You have
which faction now?
I think
Zerg base building.
I think it's the best across factions for a few reasons, but mostly because of building importance. In a game like Subcom, in that series in general, it's so easy to you can lose a building and it's not usually the end of the world. In StarCraft, if you lose a building, it can impact what army you build. It can impact your ability to produce new units. It can impact your ability to harvest resources. And in terms of, for me, I really like structural importance, and it's hard to balance like all your structural importance, say Deserts of Karak, where you have one structure, and if that dies, it's very, very bad, versus something like Subcom, where you have a million buildings and none of them really individually have much worth. And I think the StarCraft games find a nice medium where the buildings are still very important. That losing one is, you're like, uh-oh, I need to start making decisions on how to save these now, versus, if I lose it, I'm going to die right away. So I think, to me, they have the best balance of building importance. And I'm not sure that's the most important focus for when you're designing the macro aspect of a game. But for me, that's something I put a lot of weight in when I'm viewing an RTS in terms of base building, is how important is this building to me? And if it's very important or too important or not important enough, and how that impacts how I play the game.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I like that. I also I find that it makes harassment really interesting because if you drop someone, you don't always want to harass workers. Like most of the time you probably do, but sometimes you're like, oh man, if I snipe, this pylon, that'll delay his like double forge upgrades, or maybe I can even just snipe the forge themselves. And with StarCraft, the way that you place your buildings is there's always kind of a trade up between how defensible do I want these certain buildings. Generally, with buildings like forges, you sort of place them on the edges of your base, so they actually can be kind of vulnerable to harassment. Or if you you put them behind your work line, you can still drop like directly on top of the forges. And I think part of the reason that makes base building meaningful is when you have limited build space. And
can I speak? Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's that like Australia to America delay. You have the no you. Because the thing is I also like the way that the dropping works as a mechanic. Because if you take a game, so like if we look at CNC3 or Generals, because there's no dropping, you kind of you have my front line and then my back line, and you put all of your tech buildings are in your back line, and you can't really touch the back line. It depends how open the map is. Like CNC3 is a lot more open than say Generals, for example, but those tech buildings aren't really that vulnerable. And that's sort of where like commander units like Lotus and Burton come in. Like you can use them because they're stealth to blow up your backline buildings. But the idea of a back line that doesn't exist in StarCraft because you have dropping.
Yeah.
And Nakamura, I wanted to ask you this, especially with Halo Wars 2. I really enjoyed the base building a lot more than in Halo Wars 1 because, like you said, it's able to get more bases. And obviously one of the biggest aspects of that is the limited base slots and where you put your production structure. So which of my bases has my factory? And you want it forward because you want your troops out faster, but at the same time, you don't want to lose it. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that as well, because Halo Wars 2 especially, it's very focused on the risk versus reward of where you put your buildings.
Yeah, like generally the meta trends towards you either have one or two production structures on your mini bases, and once you go to the second tech tier, where your main base has 7 slots, you would place on the rear edge slots. Basically, that's where you would put 2 production buildings usually. And the notable exception to this is actually Pavium, who has the burnout power, which you can place on your buildings to make them work faster. So Pavium players like to put all of their resource buildings on their main base. Then they'll once the burnout power is upgraded to level 3, it can cover the entire thing, right? So they like to put like 3 generators there, which is a ridiculous amount of supply costs. But you fire that up and your power income skyrockets, and then they can have an expansion base that's full of production structures. So yeah, that's a very, very fun playstyle. I love playing Pavium. Many others do too. But in normal games, you have it relatively spread out where your production is.
And just the nature of that game is bases are so important, and that's one thing I liked about it more, is because you can still harass and still destroy buildings, but at the same time, those buildings still are important even if you lose them, and you do not want to lose them. So I really appreciate
mini bases aren't that strong, so you can destroy those relatively easily. It's not so easy to go into a main base and try to kill some attachment buildings there, because obviously you can make turrets, you can have your army there way easier than one of the mini bases on the edge of the map. That's more exposed. You can go there and kill that easily.
I think what's also important, going back to what Topher's saying about the importance of buildings, it's also the way that base building works. So the reason why if you snipe someone's forge or their Templar archives or whatever, like it's important, is because the build time's pretty long, and you have to build from worker units. Whereas if I look at CNC3, if you snipe someone's war factory, it just doesn't matter because they rebuild it really fast. And also, the way that the building works is they'll see the fact that they're about to lose their war factory, and they'll already have another war factory halfway queued up. So the war factory is only going to be down for like 10 seconds, and they just rebuild it. And I missed out on building one of my tanks, because the buildings actually build kind of fast, at least like the basic ones in Warcraft, but it's CNC3. But in Starcraft, man, even Warcraft 3 is like that too, where it takes a long time to build buildings, barracks, war factories. Everything has a lot of delay.
When I went back to Warcraft 3, it shocked me how long everything was taking to build. When they started talking about Reforged, I was, and when I found the Back to Warcraft account on Twitter, they do a lot of Warcraft 3 streams. I reinstalled it, and I hadn't played it in like 8 years or something. And I was like, man, everything takes a very long time. But
and that could be quite boring if base building takes ages. But Warcraft 3, because they have hero management and you have creeping, it gives you stuff to do while you're not just like watching and waiting while you're thinking.
Yeah, that's actually important, because otherwise, your already limited attention would be even more fractured between the various things you're trying to do. So yeah, it definitely works, but a lot of RTS really prioritize speed in a different way than Warcraft 3 does.
And I do think
it's a different sensibility.
And I do think we have to know, obviously, it's not the same for every single RTS. So, like Company of Heroes, that series has very, very high building importance. The downside is if you destroy one opponent building, you're going to take out their whole base anyways. It's very hard to sneak up and just snipe one building in Company of Heroes. And so just because a building you have high building importance doesn't mean that it's quite the same as in other games. And so that doesn't mean Company of Heroes has bad base building. It's very different.
It's not a very big part of the game when you compare it to these macro RTSs, for sure. I mean, there's some importance to placement. You don't want to make it the most exposed thing that you can, and you want to turn your bunkers in a correct direction and stuff like that.
and Company of Heroes, I guess, does have units which can improve production speed and things like that, but that's still not something.
Well, no one ever uses them though.
Yeah, exactly. That's not the main reason you get your lieutenant or whatever.
But yeah, also the Oberkommando West definitely has probably the most interesting base building, because where they deploy their trucks is really, really important to the flow of the game for them. Actually, I was going to ask you guys what you thought about how clearly it's something that they saw value in doing because they did it again, but with the U.S. and the British, where the entire base is already pre-set up, and you're literally just kind of flipping the switches, you're turning them on instead of building them. What you thought about that system that they put in for the U.S. and the British?
I really hate it.
I didn't like it.
No volunteers.
I'm not a big.
No,
I'm not a big fan.
I forgot to hit unmute. That's why there was that.
Okay.
No, I really hate it. And the reason why I mentioned this in my article that I wrote is because it removes any opportunity cost of your engineer's build time. So in most RTS games, you have builder units that do nothing. They either do nothing or they just cut down trees. And so whenever you want to build something, there's no thinking about the timing where it's like, oh man, I want to build this orc burrow, but my peon really needs to cut this tree down. Like, that's not the case. But in Company of Heroes, it is the case. You go, man, I really want to build my weapon support center, but my engineer I really should plant mines while I have map control. I really want the flamethrower to attack this building. I really want to throw down these sandbags here. And so whenever you build a structure, you have to deliberately go, yes, I want to build the structure. Yes, that's more important than all of these other engineer functions. And so you have that interesting decision where you have to retreat your engineer, which is kind of a big deal, the way that the retreat timings work. And you don't want to lose map control. If you retreat everything at once, then you lose all the key buildings and so forth. So map presence is really important in Company of Heroes. And that whole dynamic is just thrown away when you no longer have to think about that. Your building pops up whenever you want it. And it's even worse for US, because then not only do you get the tech building, you also get a free squad. So with the other factions, it's like, if I tech up, I have to do it at the cost of my map presence. With US, it's when I tech up, I also get more map presence because I get a free squad. So that decision is actually inverted, and I think it's not a good mechanic at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that they thought it was a good enough idea to do it again. It's also frustrating that they never really revisited the layout of the US base. I've always had issues with how it's laid out. There's just weird pathing, especially when these squads retreating and can get like caught almost before it reaches the
Well, they fixed that
center?
because the British
Oh, they
base
did? Okay.
isn't, because like the US base is like you're trapped
the
within.
British base is the British
open,
base
yeah.
is laid out a lot better, but they never revisited it to improve it, which I always thought was kind of strange. But yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say, is that being a static layout, you get these weird situations where there's no good way in or out for some of your squads. I think they tried to balance that with having to go back to base to get your weapon upgrades, to give it map presence to come back with a better weapon. But you're right, it didn't. I don't think it was really successful when they did that. But also visually, like with Dawn of War 2, when you saw your opponent's base, there were little clues that you could to tell what tech tier they were on. And I'm sure that's the same thing with Company of Heroes 2. But I know sometimes when I've gone back to play the US, it's visually confusing because I can't count my buildings and see which ones I have, because I always have all of them.
Hey, I'm in the middle of a
sometimes
podcast.
there's this instant.
Do you guys
kind
mind
of
like chatting in
dissonance
his
for me
room or
almost,
outside or something?
where I
Cool,
I
thanks.
wish I only saw the buildings I already had active, which is kind of the reason I asked, actually, just because there's that visual of seeing all of the buildings, but not necessarily having all they would provide.
I think the other thing as well with not having, like, we actually have to build the structures, is it means like you actually replace them for free. If you lose like your war factory for British, you just build it again and it's free. Whereas with the other factions, you actually have to like spend the tech cost to rebuild them. And so while like harassment of your base, you don't really ever see it in Company of Heroes. I think that's mainly just because the fact that the buildings are so tough, like it just takes so long to blow them up. But I think if they were to half the health of all of those base buildings, you could see harassment where, because of the way that like anti-tank guns work in Company of Heroes, they're very slow and they're very immobile and they're quite vulnerable while being deployed. So if someone's like really turtling up, especially where you have those commanders, where you have like the Pack 43, like the heavy emplacement, or if you're OKW and you have the Panzer headquarters, going for the base could actually be a viable strategy if those structures were weak enough. And then you may want to snipe the war factory that have to rebuild it. But when you have like a pre-built base, it takes away that complexity. Though it's more about when you rebuild them, they're actually free. Like you don't have to pay to rebuild them, whereas you do have to pay to rebuild them with like Soviets and US.
Yeah. Well, I think for me anyway, it's by the time you can effectively assault a base with a tank, because until that point, it's very hard to do it because the bunkers are so strong against infantry. There's a couple of maps I think that you can kind of work it out on.
And they're reinforced anyway, so you won't actually fight there because it'll just be reinforcing in combat. The only time you see base dives early is like with scout cars, and that's sort of if you're just like chasing a squad on retreat and you're almost about to wipe it and you want to just like try to commit to it.
Exactly.
I'd like to bring up synergy between buildings and units again. A good example that just came to me was Empire Support, actually. I'm not sure if any of you played, but basically it's a free-to-play RTS, very much like Age of Empires 2, but with asymmetric races. It's on Steam. Anyhow, they've got the Chinese, and what they've got is all of their drop-off buildings and their town centers can activate the overseer ability, which will basically make it so that when your villagers drop off their resources, they take some damage, but the amount that they drop gets increased in return. And you can combo this with their monk unit, which, when left alone, will sit down on the floor and heal units around itself. So you get the benefit of the overseer ability, but your units will heal up over time anyway. So you can leave this on permanently. I think that's a really, really cool mechanic that you gotta keep watching out for whether it's turned on or not. There are strategies at the start which deliberately let your workers be quite damaged to get a faster tech timing and stuff like that.
Like the chaos cultists or heretics in Dawn of War 1, where you have this toggle ability and you would like try to put the health down to like 3 because just they take damage every second while it's on, but they get like an increased health speed, build speed. It's a pretty basic ability though.
Yeah, in Empires Apart, the faction I keep coming back to is the Mongols. Yeah, I'm actually, I'm the type of player increasingly where I really enjoy the combat in RTS a lot more than the macro part. I don't think there's been many, if any, games that have done a really good job of scoping down the economy elegantly, beyond probably Company of Heroes 2.
And Warcraft 3.
Yeah, I mean, there's still definitely a lot of importance to economy and building up in that, more so, obviously, than Company of Heroes. But anyway, with the Mongols, I feel like you've got so few buildings to worry about, and being able to swap them out. So with the Mongols, for people who haven't played, you have 2 basic units. You've got the worker, and you have the like a little caravan type guy, and you combine the caravans into your buildings, and every building you build provides you population. So you don't have to worry about houses. You don't have you've got like 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 7 building types overall. And when you get to the later game, you can turn those same and you can break them apart into the caravans and then combine them back together. And in the late game, you can turn the caravans into siege weapons of various sorts. So it's a really interesting unit all throughout the game. In early game, you're turning them into lots of the resource drop-offs. And then later, you can swap them out and turn them into an archery range or a barracks. And then if when you're finally, destroying buildings later in the game, when you're more, you can turn them into siege weapons. So it's a really interesting play style. The idea is you're supposed to be able to move things around, and I never found myself doing that very much, where you want to like move your barracks somewhere else. But it's a lot of interesting possibility space for that faction, and it's a lot more focused on movement and combat than constantly building a giant infrastructure. So
it's got certainly a lot of decision making in there. Like initially, your decision that you need to make is: do you make workers? Do you make those carts? Because they're both made in the town hall, obviously. So
yeah,
so there's that decision to start with, and then you make the drop-offs, which you can then disassemble and reassemble to make your placement more optimal. It's really cool.
Yeah.
How do you find the business model works? Because that's something I'm very curious about. Is free to play in RTS?
Oh, the big swap, yeah.
I bought it before it went free to play. So
likewise, so yeah,
Right.
so I got everything basically up front. So I haven't really experienced only being able to pick one faction or whatever it is when you download it for free. I've everything
experienced playing against only one faction. It's a bit of a problem.
Do you think it's a good idea though?
But they're certainly making it so that it's more compelling to play. I mean, their player base increased up to 5 times bigger than it was. So
Oh, good.
And
that's good.
and they're pretty generous with the loot boxes too. I think you get one if you just play a game per day or something like that. They'll give you one, so it's not like they're.
They just added the daily quests thing as well.
Yeah.
So and
Yeah, and
profile leveling, which all comes with rewarding these loot boxes as well. We shouldn't really
And-
call them loot boxes because you don't need
No.
to buy them.
They're just. all
and it's
cosmetic.
just cosmetics.
It's cosmetics. And the chance to unlock a race.
Yeah, you say loot box and everyone's gonna get mad like, oh, this game sucks. I was gonna buy it, but you said loot boxes and no.
It's a
No,
nice
I've already
kind of
left
Get yourself a
negative
candy
guys.
cane for your villager.
Yeah.
Oh my
So,
god.
What are
Unlock the upgrades.
what do you think about the skins? Because the thing is with RTS is skins are hard to do because units are de-emphasized because of the camera distance
it's-
and because you have so
It's
many
actually,
of them.
It's actually not skins. There are model variants. So for the town halls, they sell different town halls for some of the races. I don't think all of them have variant town halls, and it's add-ons. So it's like a hat on top of a unit, or it pops the weapon out. It's not a whole skin. So I actually like them. The Aztec ones are pretty neat. They have these kind of like chunky weapons that look like they're made out of like these fun angles on them. So I think it's done pretty well. There's some neat ones. There's some kind of dumb ones too, like the holiday themed stuff. I think Topher mentioned that. I didn't like those, but yeah, I think it actually works pretty well.
Can you disable them?
I actually have no
Your
knowledge.
opponent, you mean? Like what your opponent is using?
Yeah, so like in the Starcraft skin where the immortals look like stalkers and you can't tell the difference anymore.
What?
That is a terrible skin. It's on
That's
the low
horrible.
graphic setting, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
You know how
man.
they bought up the Stalkers and the Immortals. It's really difficult to see them because they have roughly the same silhouette in the changed models. So
Yeah, the color scheme is the same because normally immortals
Exactly.
are like orange, right? And then stalkers are
bad.
blue.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Well, I
and they
think the
just
art
matched
team
it
stayed away
to
from that
blue.
since then.
It's like the Tal'Darim skin. It's like that dark. I think it's Tal'Darim. It's like dark blue and red. Yeah.
But when Link Bane had
bad.
the same problem with one of the skins, they fixed that very quick. But this one stayed, so that's pretty bad.
Wait, when what links?
I'm-
What did you say?
Zerglings and Banelings had this
Oh,
problem.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
With one of the previous skins, but they fixed it. They put the green sack back on the Banelings basically to
Yeah. God, that's
make them
important.
not
Jeez.
the same color.
You're like, oh, it's just a bunch of Zergling. No problem. I got Marines, man. No worries.
Ouch.
But I'm very like eager to know how well they're doing like from a financial perspective because it's something that RTS has been very late to the idea of like doing free to play because
It's
free
not
to
that
play
they've been late. It's just that no one's done it well. No one's done it in a way that the community will accept. By the time Age of Empires Online
that's
kind
true.
of circled it back around to a decent one. So I'm not sure if it's just the type of game is so different that it's hard to find a way to monetize it in a way that feels fair, or it's just the people that play RTS aren't as interested in that sort of monetization model. It's been tried. It's just no one's done it in a way the community likes.
Yeah, because it's hard to
Until
lock.
StarCraft 2, I guess, which is now
Yeah.
free.
Yeah, that's only recently anyway.
Well, but that's a huge outlier in terms of player base, and they already sold it to a couple million people several times in a row.
Yeah.
So
I think they reached profitability in like 2010 or something, 2011. But I also do think it's tricky in an RTS because you don't want to lock units or an unfair faction behind a paywall. You don't want to lock the best units. And Air Mech is a game I really enjoy, but the free-to-play model of that is it's really hard to get all the best units and things like that, or you see this in mobile games as well.
Well, I think they were pretty upfront with Air Mech that playing for free was basically like a demo. They wanted you to pay $20 to play the full game. You unlocked virtually everything if you paid the $20 up front, which I think is fine.
Well, yeah, I always, if there's always like a like a deluxe version where you pay $20 and you get like enough gems to buy all the units or whatever it is, I try to do that anyways. But I do think it's tricky because I can't imagine if it's just hard to imagine an RTS game where there's a good enough business model where you're not making the game unfair, but at the same time, you're still being profitable. It's very hard. And I think Empire
Yeah,
Depart
I
did a
guess.
job. It's like a demo. You get the Byzantine Empire for free, and it's like a demo, and then hopefully it'll encourage you to buy the other ones.
Well, wouldn't a better way be rotating a new faction every month, like the League of Legends system?
You just make all the accounts you want, and then you can switch to your other account.
Well, no, I
get
mean
all the
like
races.
you only ever can play which one has the free rotation each week. So like it's the same account, but you go
Right.
from Byzantines, and then next week,
I think
then it's
It would help
I
the
don't think
latter.
that's
I don't want to
possible
play
for them.
Byzantine.
one or two
I
free
don't think they
factions
can do it.
would be nice. It's probably not. It's probably just a toggle on or off, whether or not the player owns it. I bet it's possible. I'm not sure what the lift would.
I don't think you can revoke Byzantines once you give it to people for free or something like that on Steam. I was told there's
Well, but-
some technical reason behind it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, even if everybody got Byzantines and they had some way to temporarily give access to one other one a week, I do think that would be a good.
because
I think that would be good,
could
especially
do
for the
it
multiplayer
technically.
population.
you
Yeah.
don't want to every like 4 out of 5 games is only ever with Byzantines. Like they'd just be a pain in the ass. Like at least with
The running
Starcraft.
meme is that people just call it Flavius Wars because that's
Right.
one of the heroes. So
Like what if
from the Byzantines? Yeah.
what if you owned the deluxe edition and your favorite faction was actually the Byzantines? Like you would feel like such a noob. It's like, no, I just really like Byzantines. All right, leave me alone.
Actually, Byzantines have the vulnerability mechanic. Their infantry make other
Yeah.
units more. Actually, that's one of my favorite mechanics in the game. So,
Does it have a single
Yeah.
player campaign?
no,
It doesn't.
But that is one reason why I have hope is they just added new things to the game. They are talking about how they're adding new maps because it is pretty bare bones in a lot of the modes. Like survival mode, I think only has one map, but they are patching in.
I actually
more,
played.
so.
I was playing survival mode today. It still says coming soon for the second map.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I follow their Discord a little bit, and it seems like they're always putting work into it. But as recently as like a month ago, again, I mentioned the Mongols. One of the late tier buildings lets your units move faster in the radius of it, and I was having issues where unpacking it back into the caravan, you'd still see the circle to show you where the buff is. And sometimes when you would unpack one of their catapults, it would stay there. The model would stay there, even though it's not a unit anymore. So I know they're working on it, and they're constantly doing updates, and they've got a beta branch that they're working on, previewing stuff. But it seems like there's still some rough edges there.
Yeah, and they keep adding factions like the Koreans before,
Mhm.
which were heavily focused on like gunpowder stuff. So that was interesting. And they had this noble mechanic. There were 4 different nobles basically for the Koreans. You spawn with all 4 of them. So yeah, the start is very very APM heavy for the Koreans. All 4 have a different boost effect. I can't recall all of them, but some of them synergize together. One of them, I believe, buffs other nobles, and then you can stack effects like that.
I'm getting pretty keen to try it now. I sort of dismissed it without playing it just because I never was into Age of Empires 2, and so the idea of this Age of Empires clone to me was just like, I don't really care. But I'm getting
It's very much not like it.
Yeah, now I'm getting keen to play it. It seems like it's certainly, if you are going to do multiplayer only, like you need to do free to play, charging $20 or whatever it is, and then only having multiplayer, like that's just seems like a bad idea. Like it's fine to do the premium thing if you have a good campaign.
And that is one area where someone like StarCraft 2 can get away with it because their campaigns are like 20 hours with replayability and high development costs. So, people will pay for a StarCraft 2 campaign even if the multiplayer is free. Whereas and the name recognition there, it's probably harder for a smaller developer to try to balance that free to play versus paying for a campaign. But I don't like to buy multiplayer only RTS games. Or at least paying a lot for it. I'll pay $5 for it, but I'm not gonna
Well, the
I don't want to
barrier
pay.
of entry into a multiplayer game is already very high, and
Mhm.
that's actually where my whole hot take on free to play is coming from. Anyway, I think that when you buy a new game, you're most likely going to be interested in the single player content, right? Even if you're a competitive player, you're likely going to check out that campaign to figure out how the game works at all. I think multiplayer in the standard classic ranked way should be free to play in basically any new game that comes out to help that part of the community, because that's always the smallest.
Yeah.
Like I would estimate that around 80 to 90% will move on after they've played a single player. So those 10% really need the help, and I think
Yeah.
very few of them will actually not interact with the single player content. So they'll buy it anyway. You'll get the same amount of income basically from selling the product, but you'll also get a healthier multiplayer if it's free.
Yeah, and multiplayer players are valuable from a like developer perspective because they're the ones who are creating content. They're the ones who are like doing shoutcasts, and they're the ones who are in communities and like on Discord groups, and they're like replying to new people. So
Yeah.
the more sort of the hardcore people that you can get, like while they may not be giving you a lot of money, they sort of indirectly help. We talked a lot about making like Ashes multiplayer free, and we now have a Offworld Trading Company. The multiplayer for that is free.
That was a good move. That was a great move.
Yeah,
I was like happy when I saw that. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
OTC had problems with like matchmaking times, and kind of every RTS game does really, like Ashes does. But it's actually kind of complicated. Like it isn't just so simple as, oh, we'll just make multiplayer free. A lot of it's to do with like the Steam end, like connectivity between players. We could do a multiplayer only free version like pretty easily, but then getting them connecting with other people who own the premium game, they're technically different games. So it's like it's doable, but it's not as easy as it may sound.
I don't know if you guys did anything with the 8-bit armies games. I've always had kind of a soft spot for Petroglyph, and I got the first one mostly because of that. But after they released the third one, they had 8-bit armies, 8-bit hordes, and then 8-bit invaders. Yeah, and then after that, they released a free version. I cannot remember what they called it, but basically it was what we were suggesting that Empires Apart do. It was a client, it was free, and it gave you, I think, 2 factions a week that you could play for free. And you could buy the game to get full permanent access to the faction plus the campaigns. It didn't seem to have done very well for them, but I thought that it was a great idea when they rolled it out, to give more people a chance to give the game a try. Invaders was my favorite, although talking to people who were into it more, apparently a lot of players had issues with how those factions were implemented.
Isn't that always the case? It's like I love Necrons; they're my favorite faction.
Oh,
I
yeah,
love
no.
OKW.
I mean,
like your favorite factions are always the ones that everyone else hates.
Actually, no, I didn't say I loved OKW. I just brought them up. My favorite faction in Company of Heroes 2 is the Soviets.
Sure. Okay.
So, but no, I think the name Wayward works because, yeah, inevitably the thing I like the most is the thing that everyone hates. That's just always how it works. So I said, I think it was in the version we dropped, but I said that Steel Division 2 is perhaps the version of that game that sits the best with me. So I'm sorry, Eugen, but do well because I love it.
No, I never played Steel Division. Like, I never played any of those Eugen games.
Yeah, I've always liked how they worked mechanically, but they always felt kind of, I don't know, sterile or bloodless. There's not a lot of visceral feeling to the combat. Like when you play Company of Heroes 2, when you're actually fighting, there's this kind of visceral, like, blood pumping that goes on while you're actually engaging in the combat. And with Steel Division and the Wargame games, to me, it always felt like it was a more clinical thing where you're just kind of lining up units and watching the outcome. I know that's not the case. I don't play it at a high level. I'd like to try to do that more with Steel Division 2. but yeah, it never was it excited me in the same way that combat in Starcraft or Company of Heroes did. But I think as far as it goes for me, the Steel Division 2 seems to have ironed out all the mechanical rough edges that I was having in approaching the game and trying to learn it. With when they released Steel Division, they had this battle line idea. So the wargame games used control zones, and you had to get a command vehicle into a control zone and owned it. And there was like a control point thing, victory points. With Steel Division, it was whoever owned a map based on basically where your units were located. It pushed this battle line forward and backward. So it was interesting in that it kind of mattered how much of the map you had a presence on. But it really didn't have a lot of oomph in terms of being able to tell how well you're doing besides the line move back and forth. In 2, they kind of mix and match. So if you're near a control point, it influences the battle line. So it's kind of a hybrid of both systems, and it feels a lot better. And another issue for me as someone who's not a real World War II buff, nor a deep player of the game at first, learning all of the units and which units were good and which ones were bad, and trying to figure out just how to build a deck with all of these units, it was a little overwhelming. Where the gameplay itself is relatively straightforward once you get used to it. Deck building felt like it was a nightmare. And with Steel Division 2, they've kind of condensed it down and made it a lot more easy for someone like me to read and kind of feel like I'm making informed decisions when I'm putting a deck together, instead of just using what they give you or guessing randomly. So I'm feeling pretty positive about it after just a little bit of time in the beta.
Cool.
So
I've got that on my list, as well as Empires Apart. And I may also just play through the War Party campaign. I got us to stop playing XCOM and just actually play these RTS games. Yeah.
Right now. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to hear what Balin's answer would have been to what do you think? Which RTS do you think does the best base building ever?
Ever. You're gonna have to make me choose between Age of Empires, Age of Mythology, and Starcraft. So I don't want to play this game. Yeah, but both formulas are just really clean. Age of Empires and Age of Mythology, practically the same thing. The big difference there is that Age of Empires lets you plop down your town center anywhere, and Mythology has a settlements which are randomly placed around the map. So there's a lot of variety in terms of where you can expand, how your bases will be laid out on the differently generated maps, and how that influences your own base building. But basically, both are very similar. You want to optimize your workers gathering the resource, basically, and you want to make sure that they're relatively safe, but not to a degree where it hurts their ability to gather. In StarCraft, basically, limited space is one of the big problems that you have to solve as a player, and placing everything in a certain location is never the best choice, because there is no best choice. You just have to do things in an efficient manner, but there's always vulnerabilities in StarCraft. There's never full safety until like 20 minutes into the game. And even then, you can't be everywhere, right? That's what I really love about StarCraft. But what I don't like too much is that build orders are going in a very meta direction as the game progresses through its maturity, basically. And from one game to the other, in the macro game, a base will look almost the same. And you get these small deviations like proxies or hidden stuff, ninja bases, but that's increasingly rare as everything stabilizes. Anyway, these are my games, but what I would call out as a huge anomaly in base building would be Homeworld. it's just completely non-standard in terms of how it works, because you got these 2 or 3 base structures, and the game is in 3D space. In Homeworld 2, you can make these add-ons on your capital ships as well. So that's an interesting one, although not one I would strongly be in favor of, but it is interesting to play with it.
I think
Yeah.
this conversation has made me realize that I don't like the idea where you like upgrade your command center. So like with Warcraft, you upgrade your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 building, whereas the Starcraft model is that your teching up is your Cybercore, Citadel of Verdun, whatever, and
No,
that that's more
Rise
interesting.
of Zerg.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you, though. I think building another building physically makes more sense and is more readable than upgrading something you've already built. That's actually, you and I have the same complaint, I think, about Iron Harvest, where you build the buildings, but then you have to upgrade them to get access to
That was dumb.
I'd much rather build another building that would unlock the units instead of having to click on upgrade. And I'm not entirely sure why, beyond the fact that it's a more satisfying and I guess harassable action. You put something else down and it gives you more options, as opposed to clicking something and then you wait for a timer and then it's better.
I love turning my Spire into a greater Spire personally. It's just fun.
I think
Well,
it's
but it's still a
basically
harassment
just gotta have it
opportunity.
work.
In fact, it's more of a harassment opportunity, because then when you, I don't know if it gets more health and stuff, but if you destroy the Greater Spire and like the Lurker Den or whatever, like you're doing more damage than if it was just a Spire and a separate Greater Spire. Whereas with like the Hive and the Lair, like you never harass that in the main base because it has so much health, but it's also then it's not a decision of, do I harass his economy or do I harass his tech? Like, it is because you're harassing workers, but in theory, there's less harassment decision making by having a tech building, which is also your command center.
Yeah.
So I
But
wonder
then
why.
losing it is a very brutal binary loss.
Sure, but like that never happens. Like you never, very rarely do you drop in someone's main base and then blow up their spire or their lair. So I wonder why Zerg has upgradable, like the main building, like it did in StarCraft 1, but
That's probably why they kept it in the start. Was already there and it's
You're cutting out there.
Yeah,
Couldn't hear
me?
I'm losing you.
well, I got what he was saying though.
I'm sorry.
I also, yeah, they wanted to keep the same, and I also think Blizzard's really big on asymmetry in terms of their factions. Just
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Am I still?
Well, Zerg has
That's fine,
convert
Wayward.
their workers into buildings, right? So they can't really reliably make that many buildings. Like, for example, Terran would. They're reliant on the larva mechanic, and so upgrading the main structure is sensible. They do need a sense of security in that sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wonder if it was more of just a gratifying thing, like, ooh, teching up my command center. I think that's sort of why that mechanic has existed in the first place, is because there's something gratifying about hitting tier 2, hitting tier 3. Like, it's very direct. Whereas, like, Cybercore, my Twilight Shrine, whatever it's called, like, it kind of removes some of the gratifyingness of, like, hitting tier 2. But yeah, for StarCraft 2, they had a lot of like, we must make sure that every faction has different unit production. We must make sure every faction has like different buildings, like the way that your worker units work. And I think that's sort of that desire for asymmetry is sort of why Protoss was such an awful faction for so long. Because trying to balance a faction around war pins, it's just like, okay, so gateway units have to be trash to balance the fact that you can teleport anywhere instantly on the map. and then they sort of like balance that out because of the way that the mechanic works, where it takes ages to warp in unless you're near like a gateway or a nexus. And then so because gateway units are trash, then you have to have like super broken, overpowered tech units. And then you have this like really weird sort of interaction where, you know, an entire TVP battle comes down to like whether or not the storm murders everything. It's like, oh, the storm didn't murder everything. Now I win this fight. And so it's a very kind of gimmicky way of handling it, where we have like Zerg versus Terran. Like it's much less emphasized on 2 or 3 units. It's more just about the whole battle, the whole positioning.
I don't know if you know, but Terrans have been Marine, Marauder, and Medevac since like 1998. So just.
But there's a lot of nuance to that. Like you can do so many beautiful things with that combination.
I get what he's saying though. When he's saying gimmicky,
It's frustrating where the entire fight came down to, oops, I didn't dodge the storm, GG. You know, oops, my Vikings got sniped, so then I couldn't kill the Colossus. Like it puts too much emphasis on a very small amount of units, and it's because they have to make those tech units overpowered to justify the fact that gateway units suck because they teleport anywhere instantly. Which they have, they've dialed back, right? Like since, especially in Legacy of the Void, like, you know, and now that we have like the way that the mothership core was removed, like so that was an awful band-aid, is because gateway units suck. How do we stop Protoss from just getting all in every game? Well, we have to give them this cheesy unit that calls down photon overcharge. So them dialing back like warp-ins gave them the freedom to like make gateway units not awful and so forth. So like I think if they just left Protoss having the Terran style production like they had in StarCraft 1, then Protoss could have been a much less cheesy and a much more interesting faction.
But I would say many people would argue with you that the cheese is good.
Even now, sort of, that they've kind of solved this, they still have the 200 mineral warp prism that gets made every game and warps in on the other side of the map just as fast as the previous warp-in was. So I don't really believe that the problem has been put away in any manner from a design perspective. It still feels very much the same to play against Protoss. They're not deathballing as hard, so that's nicer. I remember in Heart of the Storm when they would just always go 200, move out, storms, and either GG or trade.
And I think that's one of the tricky parts also, is when you have such distinctly asymmetrical races, that it especially when a game's been out this long, redesigning something that massive to just completely gut one of the main mechanics of a race is very hard, especially if you're still disagreeing if it's a problem or not, because many people agree it's a problem and other people say no, this is a good thing. And that's I can't imagine if they got rid of Warpgate just now, just like decide to do that. I don't know what it would do to the game.
It's far too late for that. Like I think it would have been far too late at any point, to be honest. Like once you release a mechanic like that, you can't just take it away.
Yeah.
Especially since it's personally don't like warp-ins because, I mean, the guy can freaking make units in my base. That's not right.
How's that fair?
Yeah.
That's so satisfying to use, though. That's part of the. Yeah, when it's done right.
But it's just not right. I personally feel it really goes against a lot of RTS fundamentals. It nullifies the defender's advantage. It's not as much effort as getting my unit there safely and unseen. Whereas you have to have perfect vision on your own base and your surrounding areas to make sure that you know that the warp-in is an incoming threat. And if you're not in position, it just is going to do so much damage because zealots have become very strong over time.
Yeah, and adepts now as well, like a really strong unit.
Adepts too.
Yeah. It also it makes Bronze League like really unbalanced because Protoss macro is just infinitely easier than other factions because it encourages you to float up resources, and it doesn't matter if you have a 2k mineral float, no problem, bro. I'll just warp down like 20 units. Whereas with every other faction, like if you're floating minerals, it's like a big mistake. And so for anyone who's like playing in Bronze League, like, man, just play Protoss. Like, not only do you have all these like cheesy strats, like, you know, you can rush DTs, you can rush oracles, or, you know, and simply macro is just easier. And while like balancing low levels isn't the priority, like, you know, it should be important. Matters. It still matters. Yeah. It's something where Company of Heroes goes wrong with the sniper unit. The sniper unit is both overpowered as hell in like 1v1 competitive play in the top echelon, because it's just a very micro-intensive unit. It can do so many great things. But then you play like whatever the equivalent of Bronze League would be in Company of Heroes, and the sniper is awful. Like, it's just, you can't use it. It dies too easily. It requires too much babysitting. And I think you should always try to balance things between different skill levels. And there's ways that you could do sniper-style units. Like the Pathfinders, for example, in Company of Heroes, they're like a long-range unit, but they're not as like cheesy as a sniper. Yeah. Something that actually I think League of Legends has done pretty well. A lot of like the early heroes, like Garen, you had a lot of like, and Ryze, you had a lot of noob champs that like just had zero mechanics to play, and thus were quite overpowered in like Bronze. But then in high level play, they were just shit. And then they would like rework the champions so that some of the abilities were more like active and like targeted, and so they were harder, and that made them more consistent across skill levels.
And I think skill floor and skill ceiling is like a conversation worth having on its own in terms of designing a unit. Is how low do you want the floor, how high do you want the floor versus the ceiling, and that's a massive discussion. So.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some RTS games that do base building really badly? Because I think of Dawn of War 1, because like in that game, the base building, it doesn't matter, and it's annoying because you run out of room. Like, it's really hard to fit things because the structures are so massive, like the machine cult. And so it's like you're kind of spreading out buildings, not because you want to, but just because you physically don't have room.
Well, I actually was thinking about this, and I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but I wanted to ask you, a lot of really old RTS games, you know, from the 90s, you don't see it much anymore, but you had macro restrictions on your bases. So you would have to build a road between your buildings. And we saw this in Grey Goo with one faction as well, where you'd have to connect things. And I'm not sure if that's a good or bad mechanic, but it was something that we don't see. It's pretty rare now. It used to be much more common.
Yeah, I've never liked that. Like you're so for instance
clumsy.
with with Dune and Dune 2000, you had to build the concrete slab and then put a building on it. And with Dune 2000, you could not place your building on the slab, but then the building would be damaged when it was finished. It's just kind of annoying. It's just a weird extra step. I've never liked that kind of requirement where you have to have the road or the slab or whatever it is.
What made you think? Why do you think they did it back then? We don't see it much anymore besides like Grey Goo. So why was that a thing? Because it wasn't. I don't think it was a technical limitation.
No, I think for the Dune games, this came up earlier with the Command & Conquer, how fast buildings come down in those games. I don't know why the designers didn't choose to make them just build more slowly. But I think it potentially was in part to slow down how fast you place buildings. You have to put the slab down and then put the building on top of it. It's a two-step process. You have to build two things. It puts a more natural cadence, as annoying as it is, a more natural cadence into how quickly things come down. And with Dune 2000, there was a choice where you could have it come down quick but be more vulnerable. It's never sat right to me. The busy work, especially like that, is kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I think that idea of connectivity could work for a optional adjacency bonus. So like you build a power plant and you could connect wires from your power plant to your war factory to give it that adjacency bonus. So I think the idea of busy work is annoying and frustrating, but I think if it's like optional or semi-optional, then that takes away some of that problem.
Yeah, and if there's a baseline and different types of advantage you can, like with your with the Terrans, then it's interesting because you're making choices. But just having to do this before I can do that every time, 20 times, 30 times, it gets to be a lot. And with the humans in Grey Goo who had to place the conduits, that system was I think related to their previous game, Universe at War, where the Novus faction placed pylons, and you build this network of kind of like the Protoss. You place them; they had to be connected to each other. But it was a lot easier to put a pylon, and then you could put buildings around it, and then another one, and you could put buildings around it, and you still had to have that connectivity, but you didn't have to, place 4 tiles this way, and then tiles that way, and then tiles this way, and line the building up just right so it connects properly. Get any weird matches where it covers up one of the add-on slots. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, no, we can hear you. Yeah. We're just blown away by how interesting what you're saying is.
No, I just I was worried because Topher just posted in the group, is that a mic? I was just wanted to make sure.
I think Wayward, I think you're like bumping your mic or something on your table. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, probably. I'm sorry.
You're getting so excited, just, like talking about RTS games. Yeah. Something that I thought which was interesting is because I've recently been playing a bit of Warcraft 2. And the way that Warcraft 2 works is, it depends on what map you're playing, but a lot of the maps, the available room that you have in your base is like really small. So kind of in the way that Starcraft works, where like you have limited room in your base, but it's way less. But it's surrounded by trees, and so you have to cut down trees to actually make room to put buildings down. And then so you got to kind of think about like which trees should I cut away. I don't want to cut away the ones like near my gold mine because I want to wall off my workers. So I'll cut down trees in this direction. And then not only do you have like workers that cut down trees, but each faction in their tier 2, they have these like suicide units, like the goblin sappers and the dwarven dudes. And so they can blow up trees really quickly when they blow up. But also you have to use them to clear out rocks, because some maps have rocks that like will wall off your opponent or will wall off like a certain gold mine, and you can't cut through the rocks. So you have to like build the goblin sapper to then blow up the rocks to then open up the attack path. And I thought that was cool because then like it's part of what makes the economic management and the base building in Warcraft 2 actually quite challenging, is because of like on top of the resource management, because managing gold and timber is a lot more challenging than certainly Warcraft 3, because gold mines aren't limited to X number of workers. But yeah, you also have to like build your base in a way where you're not getting stuck with your units. Like if you build a footman and it gets stuck between a farm and a tree patch. So like it gives you that busy stuff to do in the early game, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So I guess back to your question of what makes a bad like economic management, I would say one that's too automated or one that's just not well designed. So like we were talking about like building roads and things like that. I think that's an unnecessary item. And ones that were like, I don't have to do anything. I don't mind that in some games, but for the most part, I prefer to be active in my base management.
What's one that's overly automated?
I think in a lot of ways, Subcom 2 overly automated a lot of what they do with especially unit production, and I found base building that much less compelling. There's a couple I'm trying to think of. There's a lot of ones in the 90s that are just real bad, but they've it's been improved on since then for most games.
With Subcom 2,
Spellforce 3.
Oh
yes! Oh God! Yes.
Yeah, they've had these regions for those of you who didn't play. So your starting base was basically in its own region, and then you had to clear out creeps in the next region and then build up an outpost there, and then you could upgrade that to be the equivalent of your main base. And only connected regions could be base built in, basically. Then you would have to harvest your resources in one region, take it back to your town hall. Then your town hall transports the resource out to the building where you want to produce stuff, and then the resources are also constrained to the region.
Yeah.
So you have to also transport from one region to the next region, and then the same process repeats there from the town hall there to the buildings that produce.
And you had to assign like villages to be a caravan, and so you may have the resources to build like a footman, but you didn't have the logistics or some shit. Yeah,
And it was so slow. Like you could support your initial barracks in your starting region, and that was kind of it.
Yeah.
And the game was entirely focused on your hero skill choices and the items you pick up from the stores.
2 or 3 regions minimum to be able to move up your tech tree. Yeah, very, very cumbersome. Every part was cumbersome.
Yeah, and you had like the refining of resources. So you had like the crystals, but then you had to smelt the crystals into some resource to then like actually use it. It's like if you mine Vespene gas, it's like, nah, sorry, bro, you wanna get like +1 ling attack, you gotta build a Vespene smelting thing first. You're like, god damn it. Yeah, see, I wouldn't
There's
have
5 resources, right? Because it's
there was too many. There was so
stone, ore, and there's a special whatever it's called.
So my problem with
resource.
My problem with the Spellforce 3's economy, it wasn't like necessarily just the economy, though, yeah, it was a pain in the ass. It was the fact that you had that level of complexity and confusion on a game which also was about hero management and like, getting creeps to leveling up and getting heroes with items and like, God, there was just too much. Like Warcraft 3 deliberately made the economy really, really, really simple, and it's not a complicated economy. And that's good because then it puts the emphasis on your heroes in combat. And same with like Dawn of War 2. There's no base building. Economy is really easy. So it's all about the positioning in the combat. But then in Spellforce 3, it's like
it's not even like, complicated in the sense that it's going to demand a lot from you. No, you just got a lot of waiting time while the economy sets itself up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I don't mind a simplified economy. I like real time tactics games, but I also like simplified economies. Say like Tooth and Tail. I find that game really fun, and I don't mind a simplified economy because a match of that game is going to be 5 to 10 minutes. Whereas I don't enjoy Subcom 2 because I'm going to spend an hour in a match, and I don't want to sit there waiting for everything to be queued and just going automatically while I just think about, okay, next I'm going to attack there. So that's my personal opinion on automation in terms of it. It's not all bad, but personally,
I'm not really sure if automation is the right word for Subcom 2. At least what comes to mind for me is the fact that a lot of the interesting like buildings that you would build, you don't actually need to because they're all factory upgrades. It's like your factory, you can get a shield and also radar and also anti-air and also artillery. So you just like spam a bunch of factories and then you just give them all shields and weapons and stuff. And it means you don't have to build your own radars and your own shields and so forth. And so that took away a lot of the... Is that what you meant by automation?
Yeah, it just, I don't know, it felt like repetitive, I guess maybe is the more accurate term. It's for versus automation, you're probably right.
Yeah. For me, it just took away the decision making and like... You didn't have those vulnerabilities. Like you couldn't snipe the artillery because the artillery was your factory, which also had a shield, which was also like pumping out units. You're like, what the hell? Yeah. See, so I didn't mind, like the Subcom streamlined the economy, and I thought that was okay for what it was. But yeah, the base building they ruined, and the main problem I think was the way that the tech system worked. Is that like you would upgrade your units and you'd upgrade them a lot, and so it discouraged you from unit mixing. So it's like, well, he has nothing but anti-air, so I should counter him with tanks, but I have level 0 tanks and my bombers have like plus 400 damage, so I'll just keep building bombers against his anti-air. Like you just didn't need to unit mix, and like you could, but it may not be worth it against someone who's only building ground units because both their tanks and their anti-air, they're both benefiting from those same upgrades. So the upgrades, it was like land, air, buildings. It wasn't like specific units that had the upgrades. It was just like plus X% land units had more health. And, and like 2 out of 3 factions, their bombers were also their fighters. So like you didn't even have to think about like how much bombers versus fighters you build. They're fighter bombers. Only UEF had fighter bombers. Yeah, that was a shame. I think Subcom 2 could have been cool, but it just wasn't. Like the simplified Subcom was the idea of it was okay to me.
Yeah. The units look cool. That's the best thing you can say about the game. The experimentals.
Yeah, the experimentals are cool. Yeah.
Except the Fat Boy, they wrecked the completely. The Fat
Yeah, it
Boy
was
Supreme
kinda
Commander
lame.
1 was one of the best units, and Supreme Commander 2 piece of garbage, and that bothered me.
Yeah.
One of the many things.
So it's been about an hour and a half, so we can wrap it up in a sec. But I do want to ask you guys, is there any other RTS games you're looking forward to that are coming out somewhat soon?
Well, War Party just came out, I guess, and Bannerman
Yeah.
just came out as well. Both games are worth picking up, I would say.
Even Bannerman, because the user review score was like pretty not good.
Yeah, but the campaign is not bad, you know.
Mhm.
Oh, I forgot about
I
that.
think people are getting salty a bit because of the pricing, which is, I agree, not fair. But I mean, I'm sure a sale is bound to happen at some point, right? So
Mhm.
at that point, should be worth picking up. As for War Party, I believe, and I'm not even kidding, I think it's the best indie RTS of all time.
Okay.
It's just so well made, so clean, very few bugs, very well optimized, very nice gameplay design, although it doesn't innovate much, but it's very well executed, and it's got a decent campaign as well. Lots of content for a very low price point.
So for myself, obviously Steel Division 2 is coming out soon. They're in their pre-order beta phase right now, where like once a week they're doing a beta every couple days. Iron Harvest, I'm still kind of bullish on. I've enjoyed it. It is kind of Company of Heroes 2, but for all that, I still have been having fun with playing it, and it's just getting better.
Also interested in where that's going.
Yeah, and Battlefleet Galactic Armada 2. They've done a lot of work since the beta. Like I was a little in the beta, but they have put a lot of work into making that game more interesting and balanced. So for a small fleet managed tactical game, I think Tindalos is finally hitting their stride. They had some rough games before, but I've been having fun with Battlefleet Gothic Armada too.
One that came out, I think, in December of last year, but I'm excited to try in the next week or so, is Taste of Power, which I haven't had a whole lot of time with, but watching a friend play it and reading the reviews for it have made me pretty excited to dive into that one.
You know, I've got that installed, and I have yet to launch it, I think. Just sitting there.
There's two more games that I'd really quickly like to mention, although both are very much being mysterious still. Like, you know, some scarce articles that basically don't tell us much, or some tweets. A game called Liquidation, which
yeah,
appears
I'm in
to
that
be
Discord. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it appears to be very much like a base building RTS, right? And it's got these several asymmetric factions. And from what I was told in the Discord, they're basically doing a leader style faction differentiation. So they're doing sub factions. You can choose which hero to make, and each hero comes with a different unit set and upgrade set. It's very cool.
Okay, so
in my
kind
opinion.
of like, I was expecting it to be kind of like Warcraft 3. Sounds like they're trying to differentiate it more from that. It's good.
It seems like it's going to be quite different, but they said it's more like Halo Wars, except more base building. And yeah, you make your sub faction decision not in the game, but you make it in game.
Nice.
And then there's another game called A Year of Rain, which does look very much like Warcraft 3. Like I wasn't able to spot major differences with any of my friends in it, from what little screenshots they shared. But their take on RTS is that they should try to make it 2v2.
I like that.
Everything is 2v2 in it.
Good.
They don't do 1v1, which is, I think, a point of concern, because most RTS players, generally speaking, are split between teams or 1v1. So I feel they're cutting off half the viewer.
If you want a 1v1 RTS, you can just play anyone ever that's ever existed. It's like there hasn't been RTS games that have done team games well. Dawn of War 2 tried, like it was a big thing for them, and it just wasn't really that good. the team games. Like they had like the hero revive mechanic. The heroes were designed to like have more synergy between them, and the initial beta of Dawn of War 2 had 3v3 maps, one 1v1 map, and there wasn't even like a 2v2 map initially. So they really tried to push it, and I don't know why, for whatever reason, it didn't work. But yeah, I think more team emphasis is what we need.
The Age of series has a very successful team scene. It's actually more successful there than the 1v1 because you can't just poop on buildings with your basic units, right? So you got the time to go and help your buddy. Yeah, Age of Empires, Age of Mythology, all did really, really well with team games. So I don't think that cutting off 1v1 entirely achieves anything, really.
It's a tricky balance.
I like the idea of trying to focus a game specifically on team combat because inevitably in Starcraft 2 or I'm not sure about Age of Empires, I really followed the competitive scene closely, but stuff that works just fine in 1v1, unit designs, build paths, there's a lot of times where it breaks down terribly in team games. And you get super overpowered combinations where, units that are designed to work in opposition together get these weird synergies that are hard to account for. I think there's space in the RTS space for a game that's focused, that's designed from the ground up to be a team game. And let's be honest, most of the most popular games right now are team shooters and
Overwatch, yeah, Battle Royale.
That's true, but those are not RTS players. You're not gonna get them suddenly playing an RTS game.
Yeah, but it still shows that there is a hunger for team play, camaraderie, and I think it's what MOBAs tapped into, is that they had more team experiences. I mean, team game in RTS, sometimes you just have crazy balance where like, instead of unit mixing, I just build nothing but stalkers, you build nothing but muters, and like that's just how you play team games in StarCraft. But it's also a problem where it's not actually a 2v2, it's two separate 1v1 games that are happening simultaneous.
Or almost worse sometimes, where two players gang up on another one and destroy them utterly, and then you've got, it's a 2v1 and then another 2v1.
Yeah.
So I mean that's probably going to happen in a case where a game's built from the ground up to be a 2v2. But I think there's some interesting possibilities there. I do. It actually makes me more interested in what's it called, Year of Rain. Yep. It actually makes me more interested in to see what they do with it because even the UI, everything in the game looked derivative of Warcraft 3, but the idea that they're designing it from the ground up to be 2v2, actually, I find that kind of compelling.
They probably started making it before Warcraft 3 Reforged was announced. Feels bad, man, for those guys.
Definitely.
Same, didn't that happen with Empires Apart? Like, that was before they announced...
Oh, like, they said, we're coming out with this Age of Empires style game. Like, here's a...
Now all the remasters, Age of Empires 4. Yeah.
Rip.
Yeah.
Anyway, looking forward to Age of Empires 4.
Yeah. I don't know.
We know so little about it. It's so hard to...
I'm worried about it more than anything.
Yeah, me too. I'm not optimistic, honestly.
I think it's either going to end up being seen as super derivative, or Relic's going to take a chance with people and getting them mad again. I think that's the most likely outcome.
I just want Pikmin 4. I need my little guys that I can command through things. That's the real RTS I need.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up. It's been fun, interesting discussions. We will do more RTS podcasting at some point in the future. Thank you, Balent, for staying up late like a mad dog, and thank you guys for joining me, especially. Everyone's Twitters, you can see it on the screen, so you should check these guys out on Twitter. We talk a lot about RTS and we post interesting things. Though, disclaimer, Topher mainly just posts about sports.
Sorry.
Don't apologize.
Yeah.
Don't apologize for
This is his job, right? Like, isn't that like actually your career?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and for me, it's more like interesting things.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, catch us later. Cheers.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Great evening.
Take care.